I swear, I was the victim, slurred the man as the hotel hallway spun around him and red-blue lights danced on the walls. But by the time the cops had him cuffed, the only thing clearer than his blood alcohol level was one fact. He'd made the call, but he wouldn't be going home that night. It was supposed to be a weekend escape. Room service, luxury linens, and bottomless tequila shots. But what started as a night of celebration inside a high-rise hotel suite in downtown Houston turned into a twisted 911 call, a shattered minibar, and a shocking courtroom drama. When the guest who dialed for help ended up in handcuffs, questions began swirling. What really happened in Suite 1703? And who, if anyone, was telling the truth? It was 11:43 p.m. when the call came in. 911. What's your emergency? A man's voice, shaky, slurred, and erratic, crackled through the line. I need help. I'm at the Belmont Grand Hotel. Room 1703. They're trying to get in. Hotel people. I don't feel safe. I think they're trying to rob me. Or worse. The dispatcher, trained to identify real danger from delusion, logged the caller as a potential inebriated subject. But protocol demanded a swift response. Within minutes, 2 Houston PD officers were dispatched to the upscale hotel, nestled in the city's buzzing downtown district. By 11:56 p.m., Officers Alston and Ramirez arrived at the Belmont Grand. The concierge, visibly shaken, pointed them toward the elevator and said simply, "Room 1703. It's chaos up there." He threw a bottle at one of our staff. Blood everywhere. The elevator ride to the 17th floor was silent. Officer Alston recalled, "We didn't know what we were walking into. Hostage situation? Drug-fueled breakdown? Everything was on the table." What they found was stranger than any expectation. The hallway outside room 1703 was littered with broken glass. Tequila bottle fragments glistening like ice across the plush carpet. A door swung half shut, hinges barely hanging on, as faint music pulsed from inside. And then came the voice. "Are you the cops?" Ethan Walsh staggered into view, shirtless, face red, pupils dilated. "Took you long enough." He raised his hands, as if surrendering to an invisible threat, then burst into laughter. The officer stepped forward with caution. The room behind him looked like a war zone. Cushions torn, television screen cracked, minibar completely emptied. "I called you. I called for help," Ethan insisted, stumbling backward into the suite. "They were after me. They came in here. I think one of them was armed." But even as he spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall apart. Hotel security had already arrived with bodycam footage from 2 staff members, Miguel, the room service attendant, and Carmen, a night manager. Their voices were calm on the recording. Miguel politely explained the charge discrepancy. Carmen asked Ethan if he needed medical assistance. Then came the sound of yelling, a crash, and Carmen's blood-curdling scream as glass shattered and Miguel cried out in pain. Officer Ramirez turned to Ethan. "Sir, what really happened here?" "I told you. They came into my room without warning. They were trying to corner me. I was scared. I didn't know what they were going to do. So I defended myself. That's why I called you." But when the officers asked why the call hadn't been made until after the alleged attack, Ethan faltered. I don't know. I thought I could handle it. Then I got scared. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Hotel staff said otherwise. Carmen, still visibly shaken, stood in the hallway outside the suite. Her uniform was stained with what looked like dried tequila and something darker. Blood from Miguel's nose. He was yelling something about being watched, about us stealing from him. He lunged at Miguel when he saw the minibar receipt. Miguel, a mild-mannered college student working nights to support his family, had a fractured nose and a broken pair of glasses to prove it. He grabbed the tequila bottle by the neck, Miguel later testified in court, smashed it on the floor, then shoved me. Said he wasn't going to be robbed by hotel peasants. When Officer Alston tried to detain Ethan for questioning, the situation deteriorated fast. "Don't touch me," Ethan roared. "I'm the victim here. I'm a paying guest. I know my rights." It took 2 officers and a hotel security guard to restrain him. Even then, he kicked, cursed, and swore vengeance on the hotel. The police body cam footage, later introduced as key evidence, captured every second of it. What was clear by midnight was this: Ethan Walsh, the man who had dialed 911 for help, had become the primary suspect in a potential assault case. Back at the precinct, as Ethan sat cuffed to a bench, still trying to convince officers that he'd been targeted, a detective reviewed the 911 call once more. Something about it didn't sit right. His voice trembled with fear, yes, but it wasn't fear of imminent danger. It was fear of consequences, of a story unraveling faster than he could control. Later, prosecutors would point out that Ethan made the call not before the attack, but after it, after realizing he'd gone too far, after realizing that broken glass, bleeding staff, and an alcohol-soaked hotel suite couldn't be undone. In court, the dispatcher who handled the call was brought in to testify. "He sounded scared," she said, "but not about someone hurting him. It was like he was trying to convince me of something he hadn't fully thought through." By the end of the first week of trial, jurors were already leaning forward in their seats. The prosecution's narrative was gripping. A privileged guest, emboldened by liquor and ego, turned a minor billing issue into an explosive confrontation. Then tried to rewrite reality by calling 911, hoping to flip the script. But it was only the beginning, because the deeper the court dug into that night, the more questions surfaced, and the more Ethan's 911 for help looked like a calculated cover-up for a breakdown he couldn't control. Hours before the 911 call, the Belmont Grand security cameras captured a very different Ethan Walsh. He arrived at 4:12 p.m. on a Friday, wearing designer sunglasses, wheeling a Louis Vuitton suitcase, and casually tossing $100 bills at the valet. The clerk at the front desk, Allison Reed, testified that he seemed charismatic, maybe a little cocky. The kind of guest who expected 5-star treatment and tipped accordingly. He requested the presidential suite, though he had only reserved a deluxe king. When told it wasn't available, he laughed and said, "Make it available. I'm not here to sleep. I'm here to celebrate." What exactly he was celebrating would later remain unclear. By 5:15 p.m., Ethan was in his room. He ordered 2 bottles of top-shelf tequila, 6 shot glasses, and an ice bucket. According to room service logs, a second order came in at 6:30 p.m. Another bottle of tequila, a charcuterie board, and 3 more glasses. By 8 p.m., a third order was placed, this time with an odd note in the system. "Tell them to bring it faster this time. Don't make me call down again." Carmen Martinez, the night manager, described Ethan's calls as increasingly erratic. The first few were typical, loud, demanding, but harmless. The last 2 felt threatening, like he was daring us to cross him. It wasn't until 9:40 p.m. that the hotel received the first complaint. Room 1705, directly beside Ethan's, called down to the desk to report loud music, crashing sounds, and what the guests described as maniacal laughter echoing through the walls. A second complaint came 10 minutes later from room 1708. That guest said it sounded like furniture was being thrown. Security was dispatched for a wellness check. What they found didn't raise red flags yet. Ethan opened the door wearing a hotel robe, clearly intoxicated but still composed. He assured them everything was fine. "Just letting off some steam," he said. "Nothing broken, except maybe a few hearts." But by 10:15 p.m., things escalated. Fast. The second set of complaints was far more urgent. Screaming, smashing, and something that sounded like a bottle hitting a wall. One guest even thought a fight had broken out. Security again returned to the 17th floor, but this time, they brought Carmen with them. As hotel policy dictated, a manager had to intervene when guests refused to comply after 2 warnings. What followed next would later become the central conflict of the trial. Carmen knocked on Ethan's door. He didn't answer immediately. Inside, they could hear pacing and what sounded like objects being moved or overturned. When the door finally opened, Ethan looked pale and unhinged. He barely registered their presence before lunging toward the minibar behind him. Miguel Gonzalez, the room service staffer who had just delivered the 3rd bottle of tequila, had not yet left the hallway. Carmen asked to speak with Ethan about the noise complaints. According to her, Ethan grew suddenly agitated. "You think I don't know what's going on here?" he shouted. "You think I can't see the setup?" He accused Carmen of trying to trap him, of sending Miguel in to spy on him. When Carmen tried to calm him down, Ethan reportedly grabbed a nearly empty tequila bottle, raised it in the air, and threw it against the floor, sending shards of glass in every direction. Miguel was struck across the face, blood spilling from his nose almost immediately. Panic erupted. "Get out of my room!" Ethan yelled, advancing on Carmen. "You're all in on it. This is a scam." At that point, Miguel and Carmen fled into the hallway, pressing the emergency button on their hotel radios. And that's when Ethan made his 911 call. Prosecutors argued this was no coincidence. The call was not a plea for help. It was a tactic, a desperate pivot. He realized he'd crossed a line, the district attorney stated in opening remarks. So he tried to turn himself into the victim, hoping to erase what had already been done. In court, Miguel appeared wearing a medical mask due to facial bruising. His testimony was quiet, but powerful. He seemed angry before I even walked in. I think he was looking for someone to blame. Carmen, on the other hand, appeared emotional on the stand. He wasn't just drunk, he was paranoid. It's like he thought we were characters in some story he'd made up. Like we were playing parts in a scene only he understood. The defense, however, pushed back. They presented a psychologist who testified that extreme intoxication could trigger irrational fear, especially in individuals with undiagnosed anxiety or trauma. Ethan's attorney argued that he wasn't acting out of cruelty but confusion. He thought he was under threat. That doesn't make him a criminal. That makes him a man in crisis. But prosecutors weren't moved. They pointed out that Ethan never once asked Miguel if he was hurt, never apologized to Carmen, never even acknowledged the broken glass or blood. "A man in fear seeks safety," the prosecutor said. "A man in control, trying to rewrite the script, seeks power." By the end of the 2nd week of trial, jurors had seen the timeline laid out in detail, from the first tequila order to the blood-stained hallway carpet. It was no longer just a case of drunken disorder. It was a question of motive, perception, and whether excess could excuse escalation. By the 3rd week of trial, the courtroom had transformed into a psychological battlefield. The jury was no longer just considering evidence. They were studying intent. The bruised staff, the wrecked hotel suite, the shattered tequila bottle. Those facts were undeniable. But why Ethan Walsh had done what he did, and what was going through his mind in those critical moments, was still shrouded in ambiguity. Ethan's legal team shifted their entire defense strategy toward one goal: establishing reasonable doubt about his intent. They called their first key witness, Dr. Leona Marks, a forensic psychologist with over 15 years of experience evaluating behavioral responses under stress. Dr. Marks testified that Ethan showed signs consistent with alcohol-induced psychotic disorder, a temporary state of paranoia, confusion, and fear that can lead to irrational and even violent behavior, especially when paired with untreated trauma. "The brain doesn't always respond to alcohol with euphoria," she explained to the court. In Mr. Walsh's case, the combination of high stress, Excessive drinking and past psychological vulnerability created a mental state where he genuinely believed he was in danger. The courtroom listened in silence as Dr. Marks recounted portions of her interview with Ethan, who had broken down while describing a childhood spent watching the door of his bedroom, expecting someone to hurt him. His father, a successful investment banker, was allegedly a volatile alcoholic. His mother, absent and cold. Ethan claimed he'd been hospitalized for panic attacks twice before age 16. The defense painted the picture of a man whose reality had warped under the weight of alcohol and buried trauma. But the prosecution wasn't swayed. Fear may explain why someone locks themselves in a bathroom, said Assistant District Attorney Julia Prentice in a withering cross-examination. Fear does not explain why someone throws a glass bottle at a hotel employee's head, or why he blocked that same employee from leaving. That's not panic. That's power. She then introduced a voicemail Ethan had left just 30 minutes before the incident, recorded on his friend Tyler's phone. The voicemail, played aloud in court, was chilling. "Bro, these people are sketchy. Like weirdly calm. I think they're watching me. I'm not letting anyone screw with me tonight, man. I swear, I'll go down swinging before I let anyone make me feel small again." The courtroom was still. The voice on the recording was unmistakably Ethan's, but it wasn't scared. It was angry, controlled, determined. "That's not fear," Prentice repeated to the jury. "That's a man preparing for a fight." The defense, however, pushed back hard. They called Tyler, Ethan's friend, to the stand. Tyler described Ethan as an intense guy when drunk, but never violent. He said Ethan had been venting about work stress, not plotting an attack. "He always feels like people are trying to belittle him. He just spirals." Then came a critical moment. Ethan himself chose to take the stand. It was a gamble, one that divided even his legal team, but he insisted, wearing a charcoal suit and a pale blue tie. Ethan looked composed for the first time in weeks. His voice was steady, though at times he broke eye contact with the jury. He began by acknowledging his behavior. "I was drunk. That's true. And I was scared. Yes. But what no one seems to understand is, I really believed something was off. I thought those people were trying to set me up. I didn't see a manager and a waiter. I saw threats. My mind wasn't working the way it should have been." He paused, then added, "It wasn't about control. It was about survival." The prosecutor stepped forward for cross-examination like a shark sensing blood in the water. "You say you felt threatened, yet you never asked for help until after the attack." Ethan shifted in his seat. "Because I didn't know what was real. Except you called your friend. You recorded a voicemail that sounded perfectly coherent. No slurring, no panic. Just a clear intention to go down swinging. Was that survival, or were you preparing to strike?" I didn't mean it that way. But you said it, and then you acted on it. Isn't that right, Mr. Walsh?" Silence. The courtroom watched as Ethan's confidence unraveled in real time. His lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. Then came one more nail in the coffin. Hotel policy training videos that had been shown to staff earlier that month. In them, the procedures for de-escalating guest conflicts were laid out clearly. Carmen and Miguel had followed every step. Speak calmly, don't touch the guest, step back if aggression escalates. And yet, the prosecutor said, despite every effort to remain calm and professional, they were met with violence. Why? Because Mr. Walsh didn't see employees. He saw enemies. By the end of that day, the courtroom mood had shifted. Ethan's plea for understanding had opened a door to empathy, but the prosecution had slammed it shut with evidence that screamed intentional aggression. The defense clung to their version, that Ethan's actions stemmed from delusion, not decision. But to many jurors, that line had grown dangerously thin. Was Ethan Walsh a frightened man acting on a distorted sense of danger? Or was he a man who used his fear as a weapon, disguising dominance as distress? The question now hung in the air, unanswered but unavoidable. And in the days to come, the answer would emerge, not in words, but in video. Just when it seemed the trial had reached its emotional peak, the prosecution revealed their final card. An uncut, time-stamped security video recovered from a hallway surveillance camera and a body-worn device worn by Miguel, the room service attendant. Both had previously been mentioned, but neither had been played in full before the jury. The courtroom fell into a breathless silence as the judge approved the footage's admission into evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Prosecutor Prentice, pausing with calculated weight, "this is what happened in the moments Ethan Walsh claimed to be acting in self-defense." The video began innocuously. Miguel stands outside room 1703, balancing a serving cart with the third bottle of tequila. His face is calm, professional. Behind him, Carmen approaches, clipboard in hand, a hotel-issued tablet tucked beneath her arm. They exchange quiet words, barely audible on Miguel's body cam. He's called 3 times. He sounded off. "We'll just check. Give him what he asked for. Be polite." Then the door creaks open. Ethan appears, shirtless, robe askew, eyes wide. At first, there's no sound. Then his voice comes in, unmistakably slurred but aggressive. "About time. Are you deaf? Or just dumb?" The jury visibly shifts. Carmen, holding her ground, gently steps forward. "Sir, we just want to make sure everything's okay. You've had a few noise complaints." "Noise complaints?" Ethan barks, stepping back. "Are you people spying on me? You think I don't know what's going on?" He grabs the bottle from the cart and walks into the room, pacing. Miguel stays in the doorway, unsure whether to follow. Then Ethan spins around and points at him. You're the one that brought me the first bottle. You think I didn't notice?" Miguel glances at Carmen, confused. "Sir, we just want to clarify your receipt and check on your well-being," Carmen says, trying to defuse him. "You're not in trouble." Then Ethan lunges. He doesn't strike immediately. Instead, he knocks the cart over with a violent shove. The bottle smashes onto the carpeted floor, the sound a haunting crack. Glass sprays across Miguel's shins. "I'm not paying for this. None of it," Ethan yells. "You people are scamming me. You're not real." The camera shakes violently. Miguel stumbles backward. A second angle, from the hallway security feed, captures Carmen trying to block Ethan's path. He doesn't hit her, but he grabs her arm, hard enough to make her cry out. In the video, her voice breaks. "Let go of me, please." And that's when Ethan's face changes. There's a flicker of awareness, maybe even guilt, but instead of pulling away, he pushes Carmen into the doorframe and shouts again, wild-eyed. "I see you now. You're all in on it." The screen freezes there. The court is dead silent. A few jurors glance at Ethan, whose head is down, hands folded tightly in his lap. Prosecutor Prentice turns toward the jury. That is not the behavior of a man afraid for his life. That is the behavior of a man who believed he was entitled to dominance, who mistook confrontation for persecution. And when he realized what he had done, he picked up the phone and lied. The defense attempted to recover. They cross-examined Miguel and Carmen, asking if they could tell whether Ethan had been under the influence of drugs or only alcohol. Carmen admitted she couldn't be sure. The defense also pointed out that the footage didn't include what happened after. After the door was shut, after Ethan made the 911 call, when he may have begun to spiral further into panic and confusion. But the jury had seen enough. The raw, unedited footage stripped away the ambiguity that had clouded previous testimony. It showed Ethan not as a man stumbling blindly through a nightmare, but as someone fueled by anger and self-righteous paranoia. He wasn't flailing. He was targeting. Back in his seat, Ethan refused to look up. His attorney whispered in his ear, but he didn't respond. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already drafting headlines. Security footage may sink defense. From 911 caller to prime suspect. The Ethan Walsh unraveling. Inside, even the judge seemed affected. Before the next recess, Judge Harmon addressed the court. The footage we have witnessed today is deeply troubling. While it is not my role to pass judgment yet, I remind all parties that evidence, visual, audio, or otherwise, must be weighed not just on what it shows, but what it means. Those words lingered in the room, because what the footage meant was no longer just about one night of excess. It was about accountability. It raised the question: when fear is real in a man's mind, but leads to real harm for others, does that fear excuse him? Or does it simply explain him? The jurors would be asked to decide that very question soon. But for the first time, Ethan Walsh looked like he already knew the answer. By the time the trial entered its fifth and final week, the courtroom had become more than just a place of law. It had become a crucible. Public interest in the people versus Ethan Walsh surged. Cable networks sent camera crews to cover daily proceedings. The hashtag Tequila 9/11 trended for days, with pundits debating whether the defendant was a victim of mental breakdown or a privileged man unraveling under the weight of his own ego. But inside the courtroom, stripped of public noise, the trial narrowed in on one undeniable truth. Something had changed. And it changed the moment the 911 call was played in full. The court had heard parts of it before, but now, at the close of arguments, the prosecution revealed a previously redacted section, an extra 23 seconds at the end of the recording. The defense objected to its timing, but the judge allowed it. The recording crackled to life once again. 911 operator: "Are you in immediate danger, sir?" Ethan Walsh, panicked: I don't know. They're still outside. I think they're listening through the walls. I didn't do anything wrong, I swear. I swear. This isn't my fault. I just needed to be left alone. Pause. Ethan Walsh, quieter. This always happens. They always push me. I push back. And then they say I'm the problem. Gasps rippled through the room. The final lines weren't spoken in anger. They were muttered, almost broken. There was no arrogance in Ethan's voice. Only weariness, as if the rage had collapsed into something hollow and cold. It was the first time the jury heard a different kind of Ethan. Not the defiant man throwing bottles or accusing staff of conspiracies, but a man who felt hunted by the echoes of his own past. Still, Prosecutor Prentice did not let up. She rose to deliver her closing argument, walking slowly in front of the jury box. Her tone was calm, almost surgical. Ethan Walsh did not wake up that morning planning to hurt anyone. That much is true. But what followed was not a simple accident. It was not a drunken slip. It was the result of unchecked privilege, emotional volatility, and a refusal to accept boundaries. He drank himself into a fury. He broke hotel policy, then turned on the very people sent to help him. And when he saw the consequences of his own actions, he picked up the phone. Not to confess, but to control the narrative. She paused, allowing that to sink in. He called 911 not to escape danger, but to manufacture it. Because when Ethan Walsh feels cornered, he does not retreat. He attacks. Then came the defense's turn. Ethan's lead attorney, James Caldwell, stood with a kind of quiet sorrow etched into his face. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he told the jury a story, one they hadn't yet heard. When Ethan was 14, he spent a summer in a psychiatric hospital after his father threw a chair through a window during a blackout. That summer, he learned to mask his fear with humor, to hide behind charm and tequila and dollar bills. But inside, he never stopped waiting for something to break. What happened at the Belmont Grand was not an attack. It was a collapse of mental stability, emotional restraint, and reason. He pointed gently to the jury box. You saw the footage. You heard the call. You even heard him say it. They always push me, and then they say I'm the problem. That's not the voice of a predator. That's the voice of a man who never learned how to process pain without violence. Then he said something unexpected. If Mr. Walsh is guilty of anything, it is being lost, and not asking for help before it was too late. The room was still. Even the judge didn't interrupt. Outside, reporters scrambled to update their live blogs. Closing statements rocked jury with emotional twist. But inside, everyone knew. This wasn't just about legal definitions anymore. It was about moral reckoning. As the final witness testimonies were reread, and the judge gave his instructions, jurors scribbled notes furiously. They had a monumental decision ahead. Would they see Ethan as a danger to society or a man in desperate need of help? In the back of the courtroom, Carmen sat with folded arms. Her left wrist, still wrapped from the bruising Ethan had caused, rested gently in her lap. Miguel sat beside her, expression unreadable. And Ethan, for the first time since the trial began, he looked directly at the jury. Not with anger, not even with fear, but with something almost like regret. It was a rare moment of clarity in a case built on chaos. And everyone felt it. The turning point had come. The fate of Ethan Walsh now rested in 12 hands. The question no longer was what he had done. The world had seen it. The law had dissected it. The question now was why, and what the cost of that why should be. 3 days passed. 3 long days during which the jury deliberated behind closed doors, poring over every detail. The footage, the 911 call, the expert testimonies, and most importantly, the intent behind Ethan Walsh's actions. Outside the courthouse, the city buzzed with anticipation. News vans crowded the sidewalk. Protesters and supporters of both sides held signs. Justice for hotel workers. Mental health is not a crime. Privilege is not a defense. Inside, the courtroom sat in a dense silence. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt louder than usual. Carmen sat next to Miguel in the front row, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap. Ethan's mother had flown in from Connecticut. She sat alone near the back, clutching a handkerchief, her expression as unreadable as her son's. When the jury filed in, every head turned toward them. No one smiled. No one looked relieved. The foreperson, a woman in her 40s with tightly coiled hair and tired eyes, stood. We, the jury, in the case of the people versus Ethan Walsh, find the defendant, a beat, guilty of aggravated assault in the 2nd degree. A collective breath was drawn and released. The judge nodded slowly, then signaled for the sentencing to proceed immediately. Ethan showed no reaction, not even a flinch, just the quiet resignation of a man who had seen this moment in a dream and could now touch it in waking life. Judge Harmon adjusted her glasses, then addressed the courtroom directly. This case has challenged us all. It has asked us to weigh fear against accountability, trauma against harm, and intent against impact. She looked to the jury. You have done your duty. Now I must do mine. Turning her eyes to Ethan, the judge's tone hardened. Mr. Walsh, you were given every advantage in life. Wealth, education, access to care. And yet, you used those privileges not to heal, but to hide. On the night of May 3rd, inside the walls of a hotel where people were simply doing their jobs, you lashed out in fear, paranoia, and rage. She paused. But what you failed to understand is that fear is not a shield when it harms others. It is not an excuse for violence. It is a warning to seek help before others pay the price. Ethan's eyes stayed low. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. The court recognizes that you were in a compromised mental state, And we have heard from credible professionals about your lifelong psychological challenges. However, that does not absolve you of responsibility. It complicates it, but it does not erase it. And then came the sentencing for the charge of aggravated assault in the second degree. This court hereby sentences you to 5 years in state prison, with eligibility for psychiatric rehabilitation after 2 years served. You are to undergo mandatory treatment while incarcerated. Upon release, you will remain under supervised mental health evaluation for an additional 3 years. The courtroom didn't cheer. There were no outbursts, just the heavy gravity of a verdict that tried, perhaps imperfectly, to balance both punishment and mercy. Judge Harmon leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Walsh, this is not vengeance. This is accountability. You were not arrested for calling 911. You were arrested because, before you reached for that phone, you reached for a bottle. And then you reached for people who were only there to help." Silence. Then the bailiff approached Ethan. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he finally looked up. Not at the judge, not at the jury, but at Carmen. She met his gaze, calm but resolute. There was no hatred in her eyes. No pity, either. Just something deeper. Understanding. And an unspoken demand for respect. As Ethan was led out of the courtroom, reporters scrambled for reaction quotes. Pundits prepared to debate whether the sentence was fair, too harsh, or too soft. But inside, those who mattered most, those who had lived through the trauma firsthand, sat quietly. Carmen took Miguel's hand, and the judge, before stepping down from the bench, said one final thing. "Let this case be remembered not for the drama it created, but for the truth it exposed, that in a world where fear is real, so is responsibility, and justice must serve both." The gavel fell. The courtroom emptied. But the story of Ethan Walsh, the man who called 911 and found himself in handcuffs instead, would live on. Not just as a headline, but as a lesson.